All right, we're back here with Eduardo for what's crazy in the world with COVID this week, I guess is what the theme of this podcast. And we're going to talk about how bad a widely cited study can be. And I guess this is a little late news right now because there's this Bangladesh study, as it's been called, that apparently affirmed what we already knew, was one of the headlines. And it's pretty amazing because I didn't know we knew this, but apparently it affirmed that masks work despite the countless failed predictions of what we would expect if they did work. Apparently this study affirmed what only idiots like us didn't know, Eduardo. So we're gonna look into this and see if the data actually corresponds to the sensational headline. So yeah, how's that sound?
I think it's good. So let me just introduce this study. I think most people don't really look beyond the headlines, past the headlines, so they don't really get into the article, so let alone the source of where the news article is written. And so I have this bad habit of when I read some news article with some huge claim like this one, then I try to go directly to the source and make some investigation, try to make up my mind on my own whether that's the correct bottom line, the correct takeaway point from a study. And I was so disappointed when I read this study because I couldn't believe how bad it was, from every imaginable point of view. And so we are a little bit late, I guess, as you mentioned. This was out already in the first week of September. I think in the first week of September they were quoting it as a I don't know, it's a working paper. So actually I don't know exactly what this it's like.
I think it was a preprint when I first saw it.
It's an NBER working paper series. And I think it was like this, since the beginning, but I'm not sure. I don't know what's the status. One thing I want to, I learned maybe during this pandemic is that preprints or peer-reviewed article doesn't really matter that much at this point because we got so much low-quality science being published in peer-reviewed journal, and on the other hand, there were so many interesting results being put forward in preprints, and maybe didn't pass it the peer review process for whatever reason. I might say ideological, maybe, whatever. But still, there's many observational studies. There were many predictions also made on COVID, on seasonality or other kinds of aspects of the pandemic. So we're not. Again, they didn't make it past to the peer review process, despite the fact that there's so much evidence right now for this to be true. So in specific, if I can mention just the way I stumbled upon this study, I'm a Nature newsletter subscriber. I don't know if it's just some wishful thinking, and I'm just hoping for Nature to send me some interesting news, which sometimes they still nowadays they do. But all the
look, Nature still publishes decent stuff. It's just they're also, I'll be frank, they're also just willing to publish the propaganda as well, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So that's for sure. There's many fields of science that are politically controversial, so to say, and I would say that most of the journals picked up a side, and COVID is like a blatant example of this taking place. Because if you just look at the science, you look at the numbers, you look at the hard evidence and the data, and all the kind of tests that you should do, in order to some article to be published as a peer-reviewed article, then this study, at least didn't make it through. Wouldn't make it through them. So I don't know if you want to go.
I want to dive into your analysis. I do want to just make a few general remarks because, Eduardo, you're trained in the sciences. So you have the technical ability to kind of dive into the weeds, and you've got, backgrounds in math and statistics and probability. So you can do the deep dive. But there's a lot of people who, are listening to this podcast, a lot of people who are intelligent in general, but they don't have the technical expertise. So I've been trying to think a lot about ways that we can, I don't know, empower is a cheesy word, but help the common person out, right? Right. To sniff the BS. You see what I'm saying? There are some, I think, common red flags and indicators. And in fact, these have been noted in other studies of when you're warranted in being skeptical of certain research findings and stuff like that. And I think if people are just aware of these, it can be helpful because a lot of times, they're they're warranted in their skepticism, right? And they think like something just seems really funny about this. I don't have it, and maybe they even do have the skills. They just don't have the time. Right? They just don't have the time to go into this stuff. And somebody just throws a study at them and say, "Hey, look, you're wrong. This study put out. You're wrong." Right. So I don't know. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that. But to me, a couple red flags to keep in mind are: is the subject highly politicized? Right. That's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that you don't get any good research in a subject that's highly politicized, but it's at least a warning sign, right? Are there other perverse incentives of funding, social pressures, stigmatization, stuff like that? And I don't know, what else would you want just the general person to keep in mind of when you think a sort of broad skepticism? I don't want to be completely cynical because then you can't get around in the world, but at least a warranted skepticism for the common person. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm.
I think when a study makes the headlines, then you should really... it's a red flag, as you mentioned.
I mean, by the way, CNN starts promoting it, right? Yeah.
By the way, I mean, if I can mention something, there was some kind of joke that people used to make, at least in the astronomy departments when I was around. I remember it was pretty much often people would say, "Oh, just because a study is published on Nature, it doesn't mean it's wrong." So basically, I mean, like scientists, at least practicing scientists in the astronomy departments, they sort of know that most of at least a sizable chunk of the research published in Nature isn't that it's not so reliable. I mean, it's and this is a joke, but I heard it like in so many places, basically everywhere I've been around, and
it's a joke that's wrapped around an essential truth.
Right? Exactly. So there's something to, and that I'm talking about astronomy, which is I wouldn't name it like as a controversial field of study in the sense it's not politicized. Mm-hmm. That's not so. I mean, we didn't get to that point yet, but I'm confident
it might be coming. Yeah,
it might be coming. Right. It might be coming. Anyway. So, by the way, so the thing is, I started with Nature, and so I'm a subscriber to Nature newsletter, and I remember still I got this email, and they were like the headline of the email was, "Look, now we finally got a randomized controlled trial study showing that masks work." Like we all knew this, but we really needed a randomized controlled trial study on masks. And so first of all, you will wonder why no one ever did a randomized controlled trial on masks in 2 years, well, within the pandemic, at least to sort out, if some masks work, if there is some kind of setting where they do work better than other settings and where it's most useful. But no, there's no such thing. I mean, there was one, but it hasn't been cited because it showed that masks are at best don't do anything. And was
right.
Danish
that's the Denmark study, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that was a randomized controlled trial study. They showed that it didn't protect the mask wearer in the sense that you could show that groups of people with masks got infection at comparable rate with groups of people not wearing the masks. So if the study was like they had 3,000 people wearing the mask for I don't remember for a number of weeks. Same number of people not wearing the mask, same habitudes like working outside of home and taking public transportation. They were pretty careful in choosing like groups of people with similar habits, and so in that study they found that basically, I remember, out of 3,000 they got like 42 infections in the masked group, and they had 52 in the unmasked group, which is but then if you compute the p-value, which is basically the significance, how much of this result can arise from a statistical fluctuation in the sample. It basically says it's very consistent with the random sort of fluctuation. Well, the p-value was around 0.3, I guess. So the p-value should be smaller than 0.05. So you should aim for very small p-values to claim significance. Statistical significance of your result.
Yeah, otherwise you have to say there's not a meaningful difference here, right?
No, because you could say, if you just sample random groups of people, and you might have just random fluctuations that occur naturally, and that's why you want to have large samples. You want to minimize like the influence of small fluctuations on the sample, and again, that's something you need to keep in mind when you do the study. So back to the COVID Bangladesh study, and so just to go, I think it's useful to have a baseline here with this Denmark study, because they study the Denmark study was performed on groups of 3,000 people, around 3,000 something, 4,000. Now this is 300,000 and more. It's 341,000 people. Right, so there were many more people involved, and so that's one way that you could say this study is better, because you got more statistical power. Again, one thing is that the study took place in Bangladesh, so I don't know how. It's not about being racist or anything, but it's just the nature of things, right? Maybe data collection in Bangladesh is for language barriers, for any kind of like the difficulty of tracking people. There's probably I assume there's a very low level of tracking people with smartphones and stuff, and so that might be problems in doing measures correctly. And the nice thing about this study is that it makes it so obvious that when people claim something about COVID, like in the sense that masks work, vaccines work, and lots of other interventions work, then you actually go to the study and it doesn't say that at all. I mean, they claim
it's not even close.
The authors say themselves, they're pretty much confident in the results. But if you look at the numbers, at what they say, and the way they're being they're being sold to the public, it's crazy. I mean, I would never believe I would witness something like this in my life, but it's
and it really is grade A sophistry a lot of times, because I mean, there's a number of tricks they'll do. One, they'll use certain ratios. Oh, look, a 50% reduction, but not telling you the absolute percent, right? It's like, well, look, I mean, a whole bunch of zeros at 1 compared to 0.1 less 0, 2 is a 50% improvement, right? But like the proper response to that is, well, whoop-de-doo, who gives a damn, right?
Which is, by the way, this is the exact. I mean, this thing that it's exactly the same line of reasoning that you find when people criticize the studies on the side effects of the vaccines, because they say, well, it's again, it's true. I mean, it's small numbers. It's like, for example, the CDC study that I think it was retracted, and at some point there was some study was mentioned by the CDC even about myocarditis, and I think they showed that like in certain age brackets they had an incidence of 160 cases per million instead of the baseline would be like 12. And then you do the math, and it's like tenfold increase in risk. I mean, the absolute risk is still like small,
very low, right?
It's low. It's like 100 per million. It's not like something that you take it and you die. It's a low probability, but it's a much increased one. So again, and that's the thing, that when people want to defend the vaccines, they say, oh well, but the absolute risk, like it's still very small. There's a huge increase. It's like a tenfold increase, but the absolute number is still very small. So anyway, I don't want to go into that, but that's
right. But that's an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah, it's an important thing to keep that in mind, right? But like, be willing to look at the absolute risks and the absolute numbers. Don't just take any of these tenfold increases or 50% reductions. Don't take those on face value. Is kind of what we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. So continue. Let's dive into this now. Yep.
So before we go into the study, I mean, I think the interesting part would be like to go through the headlines. So to actually read some headlines and
beautiful
make people. So like the Nature headlines and say, face masks for COVID passed the largest test yet. This was Nature. So a rigorous study finds that surgical masks are highly protective, but cloth masks fall short. Okay, this is okay. So this is Washington Post. We conducted the largest study on masks and COVID-19. They work.
I've got one from Medscape. Large study affirms what we know. Masks work to prevent.
Yes. NBC News. I mean, then you believe. I mean, this study must be something really good, right? It's not like the random guys on the internet can just take it down with a half an hour podcast. But I think.
But here we go. Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. So anyway, largest study. This is NBC News. Largest study of masks yet details their importance in fighting COVID-19. All right, so that's just so many. Life Science, huge gold standard study shows unequivocally that surgical masks work to reduce coronavirus spread.
Unequivocally. All right. Strong qualifier. Yeah.
So you just read these things all over the place. Like this is when you read the data. So again, let's go. First of all, what's interesting about this study is that if you go to the abstract and you just read through the abstract, you see, the techniques, the way they do that. And you don't actually see a clear statement of the results, right? So when you see the results, you would expect like a clear number that's it's telling you what's the reduction in COVID cases,
right? Yeah, curiously absent in the abstract, right? Mm-hmm.
It's there were 64,937 households, blah blah blah, and there's an intervention group called control group, and they measure a number of. So these are the actually what's happening in the control group and the intervention group. So the control group had 13% of mask wearing, and they had periodic monitoring by mask promoters. So there were people reminding them to wear masks.
Yeah, so this came with education as well. That's an important aspect, I guess, of this study.
Yes,
right? Mm-hmm.
Yes. And they had a tripling of mask usage. So they had a 29% percent point increase as a median. So it's a 42% median. Then they have some confidence level. Mm-hmm. They said, okay, so this is the most interesting part, because I have no idea how they measured this, but they said physical distancing measured as a fraction of individuals at least one arm's length apart also increased by 5.2 percentage points. Mm-hmm. And this was, I don't know. I mean, I think I know how they measured it, because at some point they claimed that they are doing all these measurements like by eye. They were basically counting people. So anyway, for what is, like you wouldn't say, we put some people in some random corners in some random village in Bangladesh just counting how many other people were in social. I wouldn't say that's a very scientific and very strict way of conducting a study. I know it's a very hard study to conduct, right? But the proper way to do this then would be to put some kind of chips on everyone and just. Then I would probably trust it, but if you tell me that that's the way you do it,
right?
For example, also this is okay. Mask wearing was assessed through direct observation in public locations, including mosques, markets, the main entrance roads to villages, and tea stalls. Mm-hmm. Okay, surveillance staff noted whether residents were wearing any masks or face covering. And then they were whether they were the masks that they distributed for the project, so they could recognize that before, because of the color that they gave to like some differently color masks mm-hmm. for this project, and whether it was worn over both the mouth and nose. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I mean this is the first thing that I would mention. So they said this again. Mask wearing was assessed through direct observation in public locations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let's take this. Okay, it's maybe it's it can be a proper way of conducting a.
It's just I mean, like on its face, it seems pretty silly, right?
On its face, it's I don't know. That's the first thing. I mean, then they go a long way of describing the materials they had. Like they distributed, and they had. Village. Then they say the way they had incentives. They gave incentives to people to wear masks. So they had some of the villages. They had some of the people that were receiving twice weekly text message reminders about the importance of mask wearing. Mm-hmm. Then they had monetary incentives as well. So that's the thing. I mean, they announced that monetary reward or the certificate would be awarded if the village level mask wearing among adults exceeded 75%. Mm-hmm. 8 weeks after the intervention started. Okay. So they had all these kind of incentives. Now I don't want to go. I'm just scrolling through the paper to find the interesting part, because that's the interesting. I mean the results when they finally go there. that's a very interesting part. So first thing, okay, they don't mention how they measure the physical distancing, because one of the claims they were looking at is that, contrary to concerns that mask wearing would promote risk compensation, we find that our intervention increases distancing behavior. Evidently, protective behaviors like mask wearing and social distancing are complements rather than substitutes. So again, then while we find increases in physical distancing of 5.2 percentage points across all locations, there was substantial heterogeneity. So in markets, individuals became substantially more likely to physically distance, 7.4 percentage points. In mosques, we observed no change. So group area rituals are completely inelastic. Now, again, like a 7.4 percentage point change in physical distancing is, can we say really, is this relevant? Like in terms of, it's like if 7% of the people are more likely to be physical distance in the whole population, can we really say that it bears such huge impact on the results?
Right.
So that's the first thing. I mean, and then it's a confounding factor, first of all, because they are claiming, again, they are basically they're having two measures at the same time.
Yeah.
So in the end, and they have no way to disentangle these.
Right, which is going to give us a red flag, maybe related to Simpson's paradox at some point, right?
Maybe, yes. Anyway, I think the other interesting part is, okay, so these are the randomization part, the mask promotion, subgroup analysis cost. They have a lot of, okay, so discussion. Let's go to the discussion part. I just want to go to this. Oh, they are not even in this, they are like in the supplementary material part. Let me check.
Yeah, it's a lengthy one, folks, if you haven't scrolled through this yet.
Yeah, but, sorry. Okay, so
and yeah, once you're done with yours, I want to highlight some of the points that Briggs made from his analysis.
Please do it, so I can look for the.
Okay, yeah. All right. So let me. Briggs has a really good. Matt Briggs, he's a medical statistician. He's been on the show before. He's got a really good analysis of this over at his website. I'll link it here. So I'll read a few things, and Eduardo, if you want to comment on any of this, please do as you find your part. Right. So he's got 4 red flags first. They're probably worth pointing out at least briefly, right? So Briggs says the first red flag is this, right? They summed across villages with the real possibility of Simpson's paradox. So we just talked about that. Maybe we can describe what that is in a minute. If not, people can just look it up. Red flag 2 is they collected data only on some symptomatic individuals, but not all individuals. Since many symptomatic did not have COVID, as you will see, quote, symptoms were badly defined, even though the definitions were from the WHO. Just what were the symptoms of? Why report on symptom differences when only a fraction of those with symptoms had COVID? Reducing symptoms is therefore meaningless. So we already see just some procedural issues here. Red flag 3, he says they collected blood on only 3% of the population. Now, Briggs says this isn't necessarily a red flag because the sample size could be sufficient. But if they grabbed all, quote, symptomatic people, then at worst, only 3% of the population developed symptoms, which is small, meaning COVID did not spread much because only a fraction of that 3% had COVID at the time of testing. They didn't test for antibodies, so people infected previously were missed. Red flag 4, and then I'll let you chime in here, Eduardo. They don't present the raw numbers, only the, quote, adjusted numbers, meaning some model was used. This is odd because they do show the raw numbers for other outcomes like mask compliance rates, obviously higher in those who were reminded to wear them. He says, pay attention now. The adjusted rates in those with symptoms only were this. Control prevalence equals 0.76%, and treatment prevalence equals 0.68%. Thus, at best, and only for people with symptoms, free masks and mass education reduce prevalence by 0.76 to 0.68. That's 0.08%, real percent, not relative percent. So the reduction at best, and assuming no Simpson's paradox, and assuming nothing screwy with the strange symptoms definition and sampling, and assuming nothing screwy with the adjusting model, which are huge assumptions, was only 0.08%. That is 0.08%, and only in those with symptoms. Important, and then I'll take a break here. It appears from the text that they grabbed all people with symptoms. We collected capillary blood samples from participants who reported COVID-19-like symptoms during the study period. This is 3.2% of the population. So that means that the population reduction in masks, given that all the other caveats hold, is 0.0026% at best. So masks reduce seroprevalence, which is the spread within a population, by 0.0026% at best. And assuming zero has gone wrong in all the experimenting and modeling steps, and assuming the only cause active was masks, right? Forget the physical distancing piece, and that no other behavior changed in the mask group. Now that's Briggs' analysis, and people can look at that for themselves. But Briggs is a pretty thorough guy; he's a smart guy, and then you can ask yourself whether you think that's a meaningful difference, and if it at all merits the sorts of confidence and headlines that we saw in the media. So yeah, Eduardo, give us your comments on that, and then whatever else you wanted to add.
That's exactly. I mean, that's. I mean, I'm still struggling to find the results in the paper. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But, those are the numbers that I wanted to mention. It's like if the headlines were wearing increasing by threefold the usage of masks in a village reduces the seroprevalence from what was that, like 7.6 to 6.8%, like a 0.8 total percent.
So free mass and mass education reduced prevalence by 0.76 to 0.68. So that's 0.08%, right? Real percent, not relative.
Exactly. So, but by with a triple usage, you're basically moving the you have a threefold increase in masks usage, and you have like a 0.8% result or something.
Right. And then the
like 0.76%. Yeah.
Right. And then the total population reduction of masks, given that all the other caveats hold, again, is at best 0.0026%.
So there you go. Here's the numbers. I found them. So yeah, sorry. I mean, again, it's I think it's very, like, people wouldn't buy this, like, if you put on the headline the actual numbers, right? If you said in the comparison village, like okay, so the control trial, the control branch of this randomized experiment had a 0.676% infections, and of course, I mean, we don't even know what was the starting point, like, of these groups. I mean, as Briggs said, but as other commentators noticed, like, we don't really know if there was a small I mean, it's very, I don't know. I would say, like, out of the top of my head, is that it's very likely that you take two groups and you might have fluctuations within the order of 1% in the rate of infected people, even though, and this might account for the difference in the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, this is what you mentioned at first. Like, if you look at the raw numbers, it's like it goes down from 0.76 to 0.67%. And in absolute numbers, it's like, I mean, like, if you ask anyone, to the layman, it would say, this is nothing, right?
This is nothing, like, but it's even worse than that. Now, why is it worse than that? Because if we're talking about, we have this rhetoric about masks save lives, right? Well, if we're talking about saving lives, we have to go further, because seroprevalence is not, of course, the measure of disease severity. So we have to factor in that it's really only a fraction of those who actually get COVID become seriously ill. And Briggs has this too. So, take your at best 0.0026% are protected against the illness, but only 1% on average across all ages become seriously ill or die. That means the actual protection of the mass against serious illness is 0.000026%.
Yeah,
they do nothing. They do nothing according to this study. That's what the headline should have been. The headline should have been.
The other issue,
right?
Yeah, exactly. The masks do nothing. I mean, we cannot, at least this study says that masks do nothing. But there's another interesting part on the study. Like if you, they also do the measure of, like they do that by dividing in age brackets the population. And there's something fishy going on here, because you would expect that if if masks do reduce the spread of the virus, then it should be like age blind, because, like if I wear a mask, why should it matter if I'm 40 years old or 60?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very odd there would be any kind of bias here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very curious, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
It's very curious, because you would expect, if it's just the effect of the mask, and I'm talking about just getting the virus, and the virus spreads evenly among the population, and the mask works evenly. I mean, it's very hard to make a case for a mask working better for a 60-year-old person than for a 50-year-old person. I don't see why that should be the case. I mean, that would be something unexpected. Maybe it can be some, kind of it's something relevant on its own. But what they claim here, and so what they find in the study, is that for 60 plus years old people, the decrease goes from 1.03% in the control group to 0.69%. So there's a relative decrease of 34%, right? So they claim, if you look at the best in 60 years old age, we can decrease the seroprevalence by 34%. So the infection rates basically by 34%. Which is weird, because then if they look, for example, at the 40, 50 years old group, then the difference is like 0.94 for the masked group, whereas it's 0.95% in the unmasked group, which is there's no statistical significant decrease.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then you should ask yourself, why is this happening? I mean, I would suspect there is some basic flaw with the experiment. I mean, it's pretty clear, because you're finding an age-dependent efficacy of the masks, which is
utterly bizarre, right?
It's very bizarre. So at least you should question. I mean, the way these incentives were distributed, for example, I don't know. For example, I don't know exactly, but there might be some way that that affected more older people than more than the younger people. I don't know. That's something I'm just throwing a hypothesis there, but there's a bunch of things that you should definitely look into when you find this kind of results, right? You see that there's the effectiveness of masks in reducing the spread is age dependent. So it depends on who is wearing the mask. You can say that people over 60 are more cautious in wearing them. I mean, I don't know. That's some. I would say it's a weird result, to say the least. Right. I wouldn't trust the rest of the, there's something fishy going on here. There must be at least some confounding factor.
Right. Yeah. Another red flag, so to speak. Right.
Oh yeah. But again, I think the bottom line is that again, if you read the headlines of this study and you just look at the numbers,
it's the opposite of the headlines.
It's the opposite. It's the complete opposite. And it's the numbers. I mean, it's the researchers themselves. They're not hiding. They're not making the numbers up.
Right.
They're making their claims based on the numbers they're showing.
Right. Yeah. And this happens all the time. Hold on, guys. Sneeze.
Oh, don't worry.
Among like science popularizers and stuff like that. But I mean, the scientists too, right? Sometimes people just blame the journalists, but it's not always just the journalists. I mean, oftentimes it is the scientists who give just really poor, misleading, if not outright false interpretations of their actual research, right? And then other times it is the journalists and the media itself, but it's not always the journalists and the media. Many times it is the scientists themselves who do this,
sure,
for various perverse reasons. Another thing I want to come back to again is, if a particular, if we have a hypothesis, we know, like if masks really work, if they're as effective as we're told they are, so much that we have to wear this diaper on our face nonstop. I know that's rhetorical. Let me say again, like if I thought masks actually worked, I would willingly bear that annoying burden if it really made a meaningful difference, but it doesn't. So that's why I'm going to call it a diaper, a face diaper, right? But we have these models that are telling us that they work and they save lives. Then why aren't we seeing these differences noticeably in the real world? And in fact, there are other studies out there that didn't get attention. Briggs highlights two here. One was in Georgia, on 90,000 elementary students in 169 schools in Georgia from November 16th to December 11th, and found there was no statistically significant difference in schools that required students to wear masks and schools that didn't. Right? That is exactly what we would expect if we think that masks don't make a difference. That is not at all what we would expect if we thought masks do make a difference, right? That is strong evidence in favor of masks don't do shit hypothesis, right?
Exactly.
And you have this all over, right? Just all the data. Like you can compare county by county in some states in the United States. Like you can, like you're never going to get complete perfect counterfactuals, obviously, for this, but you can get relatively very similar regions and just see that they just make again and again no meaningful difference. You also have a study on mask mandates on hospital resource consumption and mortality at the county level. The quick conclusion of this study was that there was no reduction in per population daily mortality, hospital bed, ICU bed, or ventilator occupancy of COVID-19 positive patients attributable to the implementation of mask wearing mandates. Again, they don't do shit. They don't do anything, right? And the Bangladesh study shows that. The Bangladesh study actually confirms these other studies, right?
If you read past the headlines, if you read what the article actually contains, if you actually read the article, then that's
all the studies are in line. They're actually all in line, right?
They're all in line. Of course, it's consistent. But I mean, that's the again. Let me wrap up with this study. It was published in May 2020. It's something I would say it's a well-known fact in medical science that masks don't work, because there was this review on new non-pharmaceutical measures for pandemic influenza and non-healthcare settings, and I remember when this review went out, it was fairly criticized, but it was just showing that all the previous studies that were done on the subjects, all the randomized control studies on mask wearing in non-healthcare settings. So, of course, if you're a trained physician working in a hospital using proper mask and all these things, then it might make a difference. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about that case here. We're talking about the real world, because it's there's an abyss between what happens in controlled healthcare settings and what happens outside. But what they did in this meta review was gathering all the evidence for masks and disinfection, all this kind of things that were applied, and none of them made any difference up to 5th of May 2020. But there's just so much evidence on like all the pre-COVID literature was mostly univocal on the subject. The fact that no one ever found a difference on this. I mean, you can say it's another disease, it's another virus, it's being carried differently. Might be again, but this is again, it's not that we're saying anything new about this.
The real research that needs to be done now is how did we get into this mess? And this is sociological and psychological research. How did this much corruption happen? How did this much nonsense happen? And how do we make sure that this never happens again or stops? That's the research that needs to be done, because the mask thing is dead. It's done, right? We know it doesn't make a difference. But why? Why is this still happening? I don't know. We can't answer that question now because I have another stream I got to hop on. But any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
So don't believe the headlines. And I mean, if you have the time and patience to go through, then you're in for nice surprises, especially when COVID, anything related to COVID. I learned the lesson the hard way, but just don't trust even the experts. It's like they don't mistake credentials for credibility. I don't know where I read this phrase, but it's very, it can be a very, with lots of credential, but it can still be wildly inaccurate what these people are claiming. And that's blatant. I mean, you look at the study for yourself, you Google the headlines, what kind of conclusions were pushed to the public based on this study. And I think it's a very good, this is a very good example of bad COVID science, of very terrible, not even bad science. I mean, well, like scientifically it's poor, but there are sort of, the numbers are those, then anyone can make his own mind about what the numbers are.
Yeah.
But again, thanks a lot for...
Yeah, spot on. This will be fun. This will be an ongoing series. So stay tuned for the next one, gentle listener, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.